Hi, I'm Tina Desiree Berg, and welcome to this afternoon's Status Coup live stream. There's lots to talk about today. Starting at the top of the hour, I want to talk about Force the 15. Let's watch a little bit about his opening speech earlier today.
Why are we spending money? And the answer is because we are facing a series of unprecedented crises, and because the American people are reaching out to us and they're saying, we are hurting. We are in desperate condition and we need help from the federal government. That is why we are responding. 500,000 people have died in this country from COVID, and many millions more have been made ill. And what the long-term impact of those illnesses are, nobody at this point knows. But certainly no one will deny that we have a pandemic crisis. And our job is to make sure that we produce the vaccines that the American people desperately need, and that we develop an effective mechanism to get it into the arms of the American people. And the truth is, and I want to thank the President and his team, we have made progress in the last month. But we still have a long, long way to go. And to produce the vaccines, to hire the people who will make sure that people get those vaccines, inject people with the vaccines, it's going to take money. Everybody in this Senate, and I assume in the country, wants our kids to get back to school. Well, you just can't open the schools unless they are safe. Parents are not going to send their kids back to those schools. Teachers are not going to teach. Child care workers are not going to provide the care that the little ones need. And you know what? To make those schoolrooms and school buildings safe is going to require resources. But for the sake of our children, we need to reopen the schools as quickly as possible and do it in a safe way. There is money in this bill, Senator Graham didn't mention it, to make sure that this coming summer, school districts all over this country have the resources to provide strong, well-staffed summer programs so kids who have missed significant amounts of school can make up some of what they have lost, in addition to getting some recreation and associating with their fellow young people in a way that is safe. You know, Mr. President, there was a poll that came out just last week. It was rather shocking at what it said. And it said that 63% of the American people are living paycheck to paycheck. And Senator Graham says, why are we spending all of this money? And the answer is, we don't believe that children in America should go hungry. We don't believe that working people should be evicted from their apartments or lose their homes. We don't believe that in the midst of a pandemic, people should not be able to afford to go to a doctor. So making sure that people have those direct payments, yeah, we believe in that. We believe that if a family is struggling today through no fault of their own, having lost their income, yeah, we are going to get them a check for $1,400, and a family of four a check for $5,600. You know, there are a lot of people in this country who are doing very well. And they're wondering, you know, what's this big deal about $1,400? That's not a lot of money. You know, you go to a corporate lunch, a bunch of people come there, they can spend $1,400 on a lunch. But if you're struggling to put food on the table for your kids, that $5,600 for a family of four is life and death. It is dignity or desperation. People are wondering, how am I going to pay the rent that I owe after the rent moratorium, the eviction moratorium expires? How am I going to feed my kids? How am I going to take care of the basic necessities of life? So yes, we are providing $1,400 per working class family because that is desperately needed. So when the senator says, well, why are we spending all of this money? The answer is because we are living in the most difficult moment in the modern history of this country, and arguably even a more difficult moment than the Great Depression of the 1930s. People are hurting, and in a democratic society, government is supposed to respond to the people who sent us here. Now, I know that there is controversy, and Senator Graham raised this issue. Democrats have a majority, a bare majority with the vice president, 51 votes. Why are we not working with our Republican colleagues? We have reached out time and time and time again. The president has reached out. Work with us. But you got to understand the severity of the crisis. And they have not done this.
So 7 Democrats voted against Bernie Sanders' $15 an hour minimum wage amendment to the COVID relief bill this morning. Those 7 Democrats are Joe Manchin, Sinema, Tester, Shaheen, Hassan, and Carper. And then we also had independent King voting against Bernie Sanders' amendment. So we now also know something else, and that is that they never had the 50 votes in support of keeping the minimum wage in the COVID relief bill. We have these 7 Democratic senators plus Angus King, who is the independent that caucuses with the Democrats, that voted no on Bernie's amendment. So my guess is that they weren't there supporting it in the first place. So it is possible that the Democratic leadership knew this and didn't care and didn't lift a finger because they too did not want the $15 minimum wage in the COVID relief bill. Quite possible. That makes it easier for them to blame the parliamentarian, right? Then they can look like they're saying out loud, yes, we want the $15 minimum wage to be increased, but it's the parliamentarian's fault. They can carry on doing that and it gives them cover. Or the other side of the equation is that the progressives weren't willing to do like the harder fight, which would have been to block the bill and say, no, not going to give you my support, not going to give you my vote, which is what Joe Manchin did, right? And that would have forced them to come back to the drawing table and renegotiate. But I'm guessing that didn't happen because Biden and Harris didn't support it. Either way, the point remains. If progressives don't start withholding their votes on some of these things, we're not going to make any leeway because this bill on its own will be filibustered. And if it's not part of a must-pass bill, it's never going to get off the ground. So uphill battle. The other part of this equation, too, is we still can have 6 House members also refuse to withhold their vote. I doubt that's going to happen. So it's dead. It's dead. And whether we blame guys like Joe Manchin and Biden or we blame progressives for not fighting harder and doing the tough stuff, it doesn't matter. The American public is the one that's going to end up losing because we cannot continue with the low wages that we have today. The income inequality is simply too severe. All right, now before we get deeper into what we're discussing here, the budget reconciliation process is important to understand, so let's discuss that a little bit. We had Republicans claiming that this was not the right way to go, that it shut them out of debate, that it shut them out of being part of the discussion, about not having unity with them. But this is absolutely ridiculous. I think more than once we have seen Democrats try to reach across the aisle to get something done bipartisan on this. But the fact is they don't want to raise the $15 minimum wage, and neither does a big chunk of the Democrats. But the budget reconciliation process has been used by both parties in the past to get things done. It can only be used for bills relating to taxes and spending, which is why it's not used all the time. But it has been effectively used by both parties to do those things. Off the top of my head, the Trump tax bills was done in budget reconciliation. The George W. Bush, even as far back as then, also tax relief done, or tax cutting done in reconciliation. Barack Obama used the bill reconciliation to pass his ACA bill. So this is something both parties has used. It's not a new method. It's perfectly acceptable. It's just bantered about as bad by the other party when they don't want something done, and bantered about as good when they do want something done. All right, so things that might also be excluded from the reconciliation process are bills that would add more than 10 years to the deficit. So sometimes, like you saw with the Trump tax bills, the tax cut bills, you saw that it was a temporary thing, right? Well, this is why. The CBO determined that the deficit would be extended beyond 10 years. So it's a temporary, not permanent thing. So, but other than that, I mean, it can effectively be used with anything related to taxes and spending. So now we've heard a lot about the Byrd rule this week. That basically is a provision that allows a senator to pull something out of the bill if they find it to be extraneous. And it is the parliamentarian that gets to decide what is and isn't extraneous. However, we've already discussed this. The parliamentarian is a advisory role. They're not there to protect Robert's Rules of Order. They're there to do the bidding of leadership. So I can say without equivocation, if Biden, Harris, Pelosi, Schumer, if all of these folks really wanted that $15 minimum wage as part of the COVID relief bill, we wouldn't be seeing this happening. So that brings me to the next problem. Is the problem that we have a Joe Manchin problem, or is it a problem that we have a weak progressive problem? Well, look, I think we have both. Obviously, Joe Manchin is conservative. He might as well be a Republican and has been in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry for years. That's a given. But I would say at this point, the progressives need to knock it off and get a spine. If Joe Manchin comes out and says, I'm voting no on this, guess what? The progressives should do the same damn thing. They have given away their power time and time again because they have chosen not to use their power. Joe Biden must pass this COVID relief bill. It's a must-pass bill. There's no way to not pass it. So if all of these progressives got together and basically said, Joe, we're not going to vote yes on this bill unless you include this provision, he would be in trouble, wouldn't he? He needs those votes. There's more progressives in office than there is of Joe Manchins. Joe Manchin only has control and power because he's playing hardball and they're not. So I would implore at this point that the progressive members of Congress, whether they're in the Senate or the House of Representatives, they need to get a spine and they need to utilize their strength by being willing to say no and by being willing to put their foot down to get what they need at the end of the day. If they don't start doing this, they're going to be constantly controlled by the establishment Democrats and the corporate money. It's that simple. Now, part of Bernie's speech today, I wanted to point out and play this clip. Let's play this clip.
Using reconciliation, by the way, Mr. President, as you well know, not a new idea. When our Republican colleagues had the majority, they used reconciliation. What did they use it for? They used it for massive tax breaks for the rich. That's what they used reconciliation for. They used reconciliation in order to try to throw 32 million Americans off the Affordable Care Act, something that Trump was fervent about. And by one vote, Senator McCain, we prevented 32 million people from losing their health insurance through the reconciliation process. So our response is, you want unity? Well, you know what? We probably have more unity today in America around this package than anything that I can remember. Polls vary, 65, 70% of the American people understand the crisis we are facing. They want us to respond. This legislation is enormously popular, not just from progressives, not from moderates, but from Republicans as well, depending on the poll, 40, 50% more Republicans support it because they can't afford to pay their rent. They can't afford to go to the doctor. They understand the government has got to help. So the real question here, and President Biden has raised this issue, is we believe in unity. We believe in bringing people together. How does it happen that when 40, 50% of Republicans support this legislation, we can't get one vote from Republicans here? What's going on? And the answer is, I'm afraid that my Republican colleagues have moved so far to the right that they have lost contact with the needs of working families.
So I think Bernie is sort of taking a dig here at Biden and Harris. he is basically sort of calling them out about not wanting to get behind this idea of ruling over the parliamentarian. Harris could have very easily said, I overruled this, it's done. And then we wouldn't be in this position, right? But she chose not to do that. So there's a reason she chose not to do that. I think it's because they don't want the $15 minimum wage in the bill. But that's what happened. And then you had the press secretary making some claim about they would need the 60 votes. Well, that's not true. If Harris had overruled the parliamentarian, they don't even look at the filibuster. It's a non sequitur. It doesn't even come into position. And in fact, the only way it would come into position is if they needed the 60 votes to overturn Harris's decision. So it would be on the opposite side. So again, this is weakness on either the part of the progressives, or it's a clear indication that Biden and Harris don't want the $15 included in the COVID relief bill. And what about the criticism that some folks have put forth that it's up to the activists to come up with a plan and present the progressive elected officials with a plan? I think that's absolutely ridiculous. These elected officials were put into office to come up with their own plans and to make policy happen. Why aren't they meeting and coming up with plans in advance? For example, when Nancy Pelosi was running to become Speaker of the House again, why didn't they run another candidate? Where was the squad for that? They should have come up with a plan to put somebody more progressive in that pole position, and they should have come up with a way to make it happen and to fight it and to put their feet down. But they didn't do that. They just rolled over. It's just one more example, as far as I'm concerned, of them giving up their power. They're giving up their power before they even get out the door because they're not willing to fight.
So, Mr. President, as I said earlier, this legislation is not just about dealing with the pandemic and health care. It's not just dealing with the severe economic downturn that we are facing. It's not just dealing with the disruption of education in America and so much more. It's not just dealing with the worst moment in the modern history of this country. This amendment, this legislation, has everything to do with restoring the confidence of the American people in democracy and in their government. And if we can't respond to the pain of working families today, we don't deserve to be here. So Senator Graham said it's going to be a long night. Bring it on. We're ready. But at the end of the day, we are going to do what the American people want, what the American people need. We're going to pass the American Rescue Plan. And with that, Mr. President,
Okay. I think we're back and we're working and we have sound. Sorry about that. Apparently the mixer got accidentally unplugged. I'm blaming my dog Hypatia. She was in the studio earlier. Anyway, what I was saying is I'm glad that Bernie Sanders showed up and fought the good fight. He got the amendment out there knowing that it was probably going to fail. Some might argue that he could have taken it a step further and blocked the bill, which would have forced them to come back and renegotiate because, again, Biden needs to pass this bill. That would have been really hardball. But I think it's good that he did this. We now know who these 7 senators are that were probably not supporting it from day one. Usual suspects, I'm sorry to say. No surprises there. But we have to continue on, and I know they're going to bring this bill back again as a separate standalone bill, but that's going to face the filibuster, and I don't think that this bill is filibuster-proof, so I don't have high hopes for that. Big sigh. Having said that, I wanted to pivot to another story that didn't get enough attention that happened at the end of February. It involves the Coca-Cola company, it involves white supremacists, and now it involves locally here in Los Angeles, a black church. But before I talk about this, I want to bring in a guest who works in the area of police reform. Awkward, welcome. You are a rapper. You are an activist. I know police reform is something you've been focusing on as well as some other things. So I wanted to discuss this Coca-Cola story with you. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, and reform is becoming a dirty word. And with the George Floyd Act that, just passed the House, I'll be able to explain pretty easily why. But it's something that Angela Davis has said for years strengthens the system itself. So, similarly, when it comes to a company like Coca-Cola, they are doing the reform version of inclusion and diversity in their company with mandating certain trainings for everyone that they in senior leadership put together, presumably without communicating with any of their black, brown, trans, etc. Staff, and instead of kind of fostering an environment of inclusion, forcing people to adopt these cookie cutter diversity frameworks that actually push people further toward racism and further from better appreciating and respecting their peers across racial and other lines in the office. So it's all very connected, actually.
So so folks know what we're talking about. I'm gonna walk everyone through what Coca-Cola did and why there's a backlash to it from some white supremacists. And what you're saying is a very interesting point you're making. I doubt that they did any deep dive into who they had participated in that when they were putting it together. So basically, Coca-Cola publicly shared on LinkedIn Learning a series of diversity training videos. One of them had some slides in it we're going to show that were basically putting up some facts and then ended with a slide that said, be less white. What they meant by be less white, however, was to be less racist. One of them mentioned that by the time a child is like 3 or 4 years of age, they are basically realizing that it's better to be white. And I don't think that's a controversial statement at all. I think that's probably true because you have all of these things coming at you, right? And you're seeing that white kids have more privilege. You're seeing that black and brown folks are treated a certain way. All of those things psychologically affect you, right? Anyway, so Candace Owens, of course, flipped out and tweeted about it. A lot of MAGA folks got on Coca-Cola websites, social media websites, and started yelling at him. And a lot of what they were saying was quite racist, of course. And what kills me, though, is a group came up with these White Lives Matters flyers that look like the Coca-Cola logo. They're red and they're white, and they started putting them up places. So locally, I spoke with a black church here that has now experienced massive racism from this. So the last couple of days, they've had these flyers stapled outside of the church, put up outside of the church, taken down, put up again, taken down, put up again. And I spoke with the operations director there at the church, and she said that she absolutely feels that they are being targeted at this point. And the area that they're in, the Ventura area that they're in, is definitely has some enclaves of white supremacy. There's been some neo-Nazi groups there in the past. So, you know, again, a backlash that comes out of the woodwork from what, you know, Coca-Cola is trying to do something that's inclusive work training, right? Trying to get people to see diversity differently that work for the company. And maybe they went about it the wrong way, as you were saying, and now there's this backlash happening, and it's affecting people in the real world. So I don't know exactly what group is putting, I've been trying to figure out what group is putting out these red and white flyers. I'm not sure who it is. It could be Patriot Front. It could be 100 Hands. It could be, you know, various different groups. But I doubt that this is an isolated incident, given what I'm seeing on the social media posts. So you were mentioning that you thought that they went about this the wrong way. Explain that a little bit more.
Not necessarily, I
Okay.
suspect.
I gotcha.
You know, because typically big corporations do.
Right.
And I think, you know, from the little bit that I read, was that these were required. And I know that in and of itself.
That is actually not true according to a Coca-Cola spokesperson. I'm not sure what the truth is here. So two conservatives were claiming that was the case, and they leaked, they said they leaked out this memo about it. I haven't been able to substantiate that in either direction, but then the Coca-Cola spokesperson said that they weren't required and mandatory.
Okay.
So I don't know which is true.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I don't know for certain, you know, with certainty either. But more important, you know, than kind of making assumptions about the process that Coca-Cola, you know, engaged in to produce this, is, you know, the reason that you're asking me in the first place is someone who has fought against fascism for decades now. That's great. Sorry. Quiet.
Hey man, Hypatia pulled out my my monitor here. Your dog's barking. It's pet day on Status Coup.
My goodness. You know, I think that what you see in interpersonal, I guess, microaggressions, such as putting up posters, is just indicative of the country that we live in. You know, I'd be surprised if this Coca-Cola diversity training, which, you know, could be tied to these white supremacist stickers being put up, is directly related to an increase in racism in a particular area. You know, the church that you guys spoke with may be seeing more in this outward racist vandalism, and certainly, you know, incessant misinformation and racist rhetoric from a president like Donald Trump can lead to increased violence against Asian people, you know, related to COVID. But really what all of this amounts to, from like the perspective of these, you know, White Lives Matter stickers in Coca-Cola colors, is that this is, you know, symbolic of the systemic racism that exists in this country, and that it cuts across, you know, criminal justice, that cuts across education, healthcare, real estate, education, and jobs and hiring and everything else. So that's also why Coca-Cola is doing what they're doing in the first place. For about 50 years now, to one degree or another, corporations have been trying to, you know, improve diversity for the sake of their profit margins.
Right, absolutely.
They want to have a good reputation. But what, you know, more and more, there's research showing that if employees are being forced to do something, if it is white leadership creating these trainings, if there's no actual respect of employees and safe spaces in office places, and you know, equal pay across race and gender, if none of these things exist, then doing a diversity training, if anything, is only going to increase hostilities. So that's why we talk about diversity and inclusion. Having a diverse cabinet for Joe Biden is the same as having a diverse office place if there's not a diversity of opinion and not a diversity of perspectives, and people are not valued equally, irrespective of their skin color.
Okay.
So, I think it's really timely and poignant that it's Employee Appreciation Day today. And,
oh, is it? I didn't know that.
And so on the same day that it's Employee Appreciation Day, the bill for a $15 measly minimum wage that amounts to $32,000 a year is rejected, thanks to some Democrats who are just as bad as the Republicans. And we're talking about corporations, ostensibly doing something positive, being well-intentioned, but not doing it the right way.
Okay, that makes sense. I see what you're saying there. So you mentioned the George Floyd Act that just passed the House. I want to talk about that for a second because I think this has also flown under the radar given we've been really focusing on this COVID relief package. And I think other things have been getting passed through that we have not paid attention to. This is one of them. So the George Floyd Act, what I'm kind of stunned by is it gives police $750 million more dollars, which is the exact opposite of what activists are asking for. Activists are basically saying defund the police, meaning pull out of the police budget the things that would be better served with mental health services, would be better served by, simple things even as the coroner's office. Why are we sending armed police officers to let family members know when someone has passed away? That's crazy, right? There's so many things that can be pulled out of that budget that would be better served in other parts of the city, other parts of the budget. So why are they giving $750 million more to the police in a bill named after George Floyd? How is this even possible?
Right. As the incredible Dereka Purnell, an abolitionist, Black feminist, said in her column for The Guardian, this bill wouldn't even have saved George Floyd. This bill is very similar to these diversity trainings that on paper and that they look like they're well-intentioned, they look like they're trying to achieve things, but because they're not actually defunding, they're not rethinking the use of police or the exorbitant funding of police, and in fact, as you said, increasing funding to police, because they're not decarceral in nature, and they're not providing resources to communities to better protect themselves and to address the root causes of crime that is not nearly as severe as the media would like you to believe it is. It is actually just perpetuating, it's a new way of doing the same thing. So when you look at probation, parole, house arrest, and electronic monitoring, these are all examples of things that were promoted as alternatives to incarceration and yet grew alongside mass incarceration. And people who might not have gone to prison and prior to alternatives to incarceration would have gone home are now still trapped in the system. So we're actually expanding the carceral state. And this George Floyd Policing Act is not only giving $750 million more to police themselves and hold themselves accountable.
Which is like insane.
Which is completely insane. And I'll share a couple stats about that will really, hone in on this. They are also, doing things that from the outside looking in to people who aren't well-versed in this stuff looks really good. So increasing requirements around body cams and dash cams. Coincidentally, as I was just joining you, a friend of mine, Alec Karakatsanis, who founded and is executive director of the Civil Rights Corps, just shared a thread with me from Twitter where he talks about how for a long time, the police have wanted body cameras. The police have wanted dash cams. And the reason why is because they can't control what is the real objective, and that is to have the power in the hands of the people, of independent journalists, of your everyday passerby, who is more and more capturing these horrific instances of police brutality on their phones. They want to control it. So if they're the ones with the cameras, as they continue to try to push laws to make filming police illegal, they have the right, and we've seen it time and time again, they decide when to turn off the cameras. They decide, and they're trying to connect this with new facial recognition databases that have been proven, just like racial profiling of police, to disproportionately impact Black and brown people. All of this is a great boon to Amazon, Palantir, and even a venture capital firm backed by the CIA. So then you look at, for example, from 2005 to 2018, so 13 years, 13,000 cops killed somebody. Cops are responsible for 1/3 of all stranger murders and kill 3 people every day. 13,000 over those 13 years, only 80 of them were charged with anything. Now compare that to the federal grand jury indictment rate of 99%. Of those 80, I believe that only 15 were actually found guilty, and only 1 was found guilty of a crime like murder or manslaughter. So we have just given $750 million more for cops to continue to do what they're already doing, which is protecting themselves, not holding themselves accountable. So that's why, people like me who are abolitionists, people like me who read more deeply into these laws say, as well-intentioned as it may be, you're just increasing the power of police. You're doing the opposite of what we're calling for. You're increasing funding to police. Why is it that just like people are at Coca-Cola or these other corporations are not asking Black women, for instance, what their diversity and inclusion training should look like? Why is it that these politicians and lawmakers who we've elected are not asking Movement for Black Lives and others who supported the Breathe Act as an alternative to this, which actually makes us safer, which actually holds police accountable? It's because it's a lot easier to pass through something that is going to be approved on both sides of the aisle, that's just a gentler form of genocide and doesn't actually dismantle or even chip away at the racist classist system.
Indeed. Let's talk about the Breathe Act then in juxtaposition. What were the key differences? And let me ask you this, Awkward. Do you know what were the progressives that refused to vote yes on this bill in the House? I know a lot of Democrats also supported it. It had bipartisan support, meaning the George Floyd Act, not Breathe.
I don't know the answer to that. I focused more on
the meat and potatoes. I gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm a little more radical. I have very little faith in any of them. So, we started this conversation with you, thanking Bernie for being the best of a ton of bad. And I'm not that impressed. Thank you, Bernie, you're the least terrible. But, we elected you guys, and you're pushing a little bit for 15 when it should be 25. So I feel the same way about bills and like the George Floyd Act. I don't care if you voted for it or not, because in reality, there are things you could be getting behind. It's not like the Breathe Act was developed by some random person in a basement. These are things that actual senators and congresspeople are in favor of, but they don't have the power to get enough support from their peers. So, it's all about politics and what is going to pass and, what is going to make you look like you're doing the right thing without upsetting your corporate donors. And that's what is, there's a huge profit motive in policing and incarceration. And so it's going to be hard to make any substantive changes that, because we have to get a certain number of votes from people who don't really care about us.
Right. No, I brought that up earlier because I think this is the salient point. Joe Manchin only controls this environment because he's willing to put his foot down and take a hard stance. And why is it that progressives cannot do the same? Are they worried about the optics that they might be tagged with this idea that I put my foot down, so now COVID relief is going to be behind 3 or 4 days? But they're not looking at the bigger picture. They've sort of given up everything time and time again to the point where they just don't even try anymore. And it's like this really bad game of chicken in which, the corporate Democrats always seem to win only because they're willing to get in the car and drive. Whereas the progressives are all just sitting on the sideline going, and here's the thing, a budget reconciliation bill was our one chance, right? Because if we try to do this standalone, it's going to get filibustered. There's no way around that. That is the reality. If it's attached to a must-pass bill, a budget reconciliation bill that's not subject to the same filibuster, that is our one chance. And now it turns out, well, we know who those 7 senators are. Like I said earlier, we know who they are. We've got their names. It's not a surprise. But would it have made a difference? My point is this. Would it have made a difference if just one senator, just one progressive senator had put their foot down and said, I'm not voting, I'm blocking the bill until we renegotiate this thing?
Yeah.
I mean,
every time, would it have made a difference in, if one of the so-called squad didn't vote for Nancy Pelosi? Right. And so more and more, I focus less and less on the national political arena because to me, it's time to acknowledge how little they care about us, how little control we have over national decisions. And so we just have to accept that the status quo of growing the 1% and shrinking everything, growing the wealth of the 1% and shrinking the wealth of everyone else, keeping the poor is just a matter of fact. Then we can focus on local politics, not just local elections, but like local community groups, mutual aid, things that will actually improve our living conditions. So no matter what they're doing at the national level to oppress us, we can still be safe and be able to be happy and healthy and do the things that are worth living for. Helping each other and holding each other accountable as people, as human beings, as members of our communities, without the police, that to me is the ideal. And we can do that whether they increase the minimum wage or not. Those who are poor in the community get help from those who have more money. It's that simple.
Right. So I want to shift a little bit too to the Rochester Police Department. This week, 2 really horrible events have come to light. The first involved, this one really blows my mind, a 9-year-old girl. So the Rochester police pretty much tackled her. They pepper sprayed her. I kid you not. They pepper sprayed a 9-year-old kid. Like, this is just amazing to me. Locked her up in the car to get, put her in the back of the cop car. What is her crime? She ran away from home. How many 9-year-olds have done this? They get mad at mommy and daddy and they're like, I'm running away. So this means that she deserved to be tackled and pepper sprayed? Are you kidding me, Rochester Police Department? This is insane. And when they were asked about it, one of the officers said, this required an officer using an irritant. They actually said this required. That's outrageous. If she pulled away and she kicked and screamed and fought them a little bit, she's 9. She's a 9-year-old. That's what 9-year-olds are going to do. My God. You're out of your minds for pepper spraying a 9-year-old. So then the second one was a mother that was caught shoplifting. They brutalized her and pepper sprayed her. So what's going on with the Rochester Police Department?
Well, Rochester is one of many police departments that is obscenely violent and incredibly corrupt. And so when we talk about abolishing the police, when we talk about step one being defunding down to zero and reallocating those funds to different types of programs that actually keep us safer, for instance, wellness checks instead of patrols, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, there's a lot of things that we can immediately do to build a society that would sustain and, work where we could replace care. We replace cops in cages with care. Rochester is, in my opinion, one of those police departments that has proven itself to be particularly violent and corrupt, and should be dismantled right away. As a co-founder of 10 Demands, I co-created these 10 Demands for Justice that are designed to help jurisdictions like a Rochester structure and organize their demands to defund their police departments, and make decisions for their communities in terms of investing, changing the budgets so that they can keep each other safe and healthy. Rochester is an example of one that should be dismantled right away. Part of the 10 Demands includes, one positive element of the George Floyd Policing Act, which was a national registry of police misconduct.
Yeah.
Publicly disclosing all discrepancies in certain, in courts and with prosecutors, ending qualified immunity. There's a lot of things that we can do so that this does not repeat itself. But if you look at Rochester, on January 29th, they didn't just pepper spray a 9-year-old Black girl. They tackled her. They handcuffed her, they locked her in a car, and they pepper sprayed her while she was stuck handcuffed in the back of a squad car from both windows. And this was because she was living in an unsafe household, not because she was a criminal. And even if she were, that would be completely accepted.
Hang on, so awkward, she ran away because she was in an unsafe household?
Correct.
Okay, that makes this even more extreme.
Yes. Then, yesterday, I believe it was, if possibly today, yesterday, I think they did something again very similar, where a woman was falsely accused of shoplifting. She opened up her purse and showed the police her entire purse, the contents, that she hadn't actually shoplifted anything. Had she shoplifted during a pandemic when we're not getting the support we need and people are starving, still wouldn't have deserved to be body slammed and pepper sprayed holding her 3-year-old, but she didn't even do it. And these two incidents actually come on the heels of the murder of Daniel Prude, a 41-year-old Black man who was suffering a mental health episode. And instead of de-escalating, the cops did what the cops do, and they murdered him. And of course, were not held responsible. So that's 3 widely known public instances of police murder and brutality in one town from one department in less than 1 year. If anything, if they're, outside of like the NYPD departments closer to the city, or the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department, there aren't very many examples of departments that should so clearly be dismantled than this one. But it's, like I said, it's one of many. This is endemic in this country, in a place where more than 40% of cops admit to beating their domestic partners. They are the most violent members of our society. And when we are in the midst of any kind of crisis, they are the last people that we should be calling.
I hear that. So let me ask you this. When you talk about abolish the police and replacing with other things, I understand what you're saying. I think a lot of folks don't, and they get worried about that because they want to know that there's going to be a detective there to investigate a murder when it happens, to investigate a rape when it happens, and things of this nature. So explain to folks what we are talking about replacing the police with.
Yeah, anyone who tells you that defund or abolish don't actually mean those things are either not an abolitionist, they're not part of the movement, they don't understand it, or they're lying to you. When I say abolish, I mean abolish. But there are some things that are common misconceptions. One is that what we have now is actually working, which it's not. In no other field would you be able to keep your job if you did it correctly 2% of the time. But cops in this country solve 2% of all major crimes. They're completely not doing what you think they're doing because of all the propaganda we've been force-fed our whole lives.
Propaganda's a thing. That's the word I use too.
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to not solving any crimes that have already happened, they don't prevent crimes. They do not stop crimes in the process of happening. If they show up at all, we see in places like Portland, half the time, if not more, they don't bother to show up. But when they do, it's after the fact. They don't solve the crime or fix the underlying causes that will actually keep the victim safer in the future. When they do show up at a situation, we see in the case of a Daniel Prude or in the case of the 9-year-old that they escalate the violence. And then we have tons of research about situations like stop and frisk with minor interactions with police actually increase the likelihood of future criminality. So in every way, shape, and form, cops are not doing what we think we want them to be doing now. So you take that assumption out, then you also get over a couple other things that are misconceptions about abolition. One, that it's about absence, that it would be anarchy and people would not be held accountable. It's actually quite the opposite. Since most crimes aren't solved, since murders aren't solved, since there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of rape kits in police warehouses all over the country that no one's even bothered to test, through other forms of justice, we are actually in an abolitionist society held accountable more so. Through mediation, through transformative justice, the victims and the perpetrators, who most of the time have been victims themselves, are both transformed through the process. Through community service, they're both transformed. The person who is committing a crime most likely is doing so out of desperation.
That's true.
And is then held responsible to repair the damage that they've caused to that community. Prisons do not reduce crime. They do not rehabilitate people. Recidivism is rampant, and so we get rid of the same people that we enslaved at the start of this, capitalist country. We profit off of them by having them work for free or 8 cents an hour, and we don't provide them with anything that they'll need to survive once they come out. So we're not making them a more functional part of society. We're not making ourselves safer, because when they come out, they're the same person, only they've now been treated like an animal for the last however many years. Right. That's the second thing. So the cops and the prisons are not doing what you think they're doing now. Abolition does not entail not holding people accountable. It actually means holding them more accountable in a more effective way. And the other thing that should assuage some fears is that no one is saying that this should happen overnight. In our society today, where we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the incarcerated population, where income inequality, and all types of other inequalities are so extreme, where people are starving, where white people are just as likely to do drugs and more likely to sell drugs, but the people who are in prison look very different from that. We can't just overnight close all the prisons and close all of the precincts and open all of the prisons and jails. We're not prepared for that. So that's why
that would be chaotic.
It would be catastrophic, right?
Yeah.
So an abolitionist is saying that's why we say step one is defund, but not just defund, carefully, strategically defund and reallocate. Right. So as we're reducing salaries to zero, as we're reducing investments in police departments to zero, we are doing other things to build up this alternative society so that when police salaries are at zero, and when we've freed all of the people who can and should be freed right away, when we've changed the laws so it's not racist and classist, when we've built these alternative mechanisms for jobs training, mutual aid, education, substance abuse and mental health treatment, and mediation and counseling and all of these other services that would actually keep us safer, at that point we can abolish. So there's no reason you can't support abolition down the road, because you know that what is happening now, statistics don't lie, are not working to protect us, are not working for the people. They're working for the corporations.
Yeah,
they're working
protect private property, wealthy elites.
Right.
I think that's definitely true to an extent.
Yeah, and actually, it's another, it's a language thing, but when I say it's not working, I mean it's not working for us. I mean it's not working for Black women, for trans people. It is working exactly as it was intended. Police were created after slavery.
That's right.
To, when they were creating new laws that would target former slaves.
Yeah, they were slave catchers.
And they went from, literally torturing and murdering Black people for breaking these new laws to putting them in cells and chain gangs to profit off of them. So that's why it in one way is working beautifully, and reforms that just change the outward appearance of it, but still control and dehumanize, just perpetuate that, don't actually work. That's why, when we pass laws and on any level, local, state, or federal, they need to actually chip away at the system on the road to full abolition. Because otherwise, because it works so well for the corporations and the 1% and the white supremacists, doing things that don't lead us toward abolition aren't working at all.
All right, let me ask you this. I hear what you're saying about the low rate of solving crime. That is definitely a true thing. And I don't think it's controversial to state that a lot of these crimes are grounded in the failures of capitalism. That's absolutely true. If folks had enough, were able to, take care of themselves, their family, and weren't wanting for things, a lot of that crime would dissipate. But let me ask you this. Is there some sort of best practice or some other country that has a best practice that you look to model what we replace this with? Is it just detectives doing detective work? What does that sort of look like?
Yeah, so there would be first responders also.
Okay.
You kind of asked me that question, and I didn't really get around to answering it. So,
well, I just think people hear abolition, and they don't know exactly what that means, but they do think it's chaotic or chaos. I've even asked this question of many BLM activists because I would like to know what their opinion is. And a lot of them do respond that they think that that's an extreme response. But I think they think it's extreme. And I did at first too, believe me, because I was like, wait, what are you gonna, we can't have murderers running around, right? But when you talk to somebody, you realize that there are all these things you would replace them with that are far more effective at actually solving crime and preventing crime, then it makes sense.
Right. Again, what we have now doesn't work, and it was created by human beings. So there's no reason why we can't think. Oh yes, we have dogs and cats now. You know, there's no reason that we can't think outside of the prison box or the shackles. You know, there are alternatives, and to think that, you know, they've all necessarily been fully thought out, or that every single one is going to work 100% of the time, would be foolish. But since what we have now doesn't work at all, since as we said, cops solve only 2% of major crimes, since the tough on crime rhetoric comes from this collaboration with mainstream media to instill fear in us, that we are misinformed and believe that that murder is skyrocketing and prison's going to protect us. You know, the percentage of people, the percentage of like crimes committed by serial killers is, for instance, is like 0.005% or something. 1/3 of all murders in this country that are committed by people, you know, you don't know intimately, are committed by cops. So, you know, that, like, to me,
is it that high? That's wild. Wow.
It is. And to just throw your hands up and be like, well, it sounds scary, I'm not going to do it, is weak to me. So you have, like, if you can acknowledge the facts staring at you in the face, that something else has to be done, then it's about getting creative. It's about collaborating and coming up with these alternatives. And yeah, like, there are a couple things we can look at, like, you know, Norway, for instance. Like, there are countries, you know, out there that we can look at for like some hints, but we have to do it here. We have our own unique dynamic, like,
we do, because we have guns everywhere too. I think the amount of gun ownership in the country is something to look at, for sure. I'm not saying I'm for or against gun ownership. I'm not commenting on that. I'm just saying we do have more guns in the United States than any other nation.
Absolutely. And so, you know, there would be first responders. It would not be that there's no one to call. It would be that for the first time ever, the people you call are actually trained to help you. Cops come with guns, with incredibly poor training, with implicit bias, and they escalate, they beat, they tear gas, they pepper spray, they murder. And they do it insanely disproportionately against people who don't look like them, who live in communities that they are policing that they do not live in. So in an abolitionist society, we have, and there are programs like this in different places in the country that people can call instead of police, or in other cities, one's called Cahoots. In other cities, they go along with the police. The solution, though, is to get rid of police and have unarmed experts who know how to deal with people in crisis, who can actually help keep the individuals safer and the people around them safer and the communities safer. These are highly trained experts, unlike police, who are only trained to be violent. You can look at their police trainings, you can look at their videos. They are taught how to hurt people, how to choke people, how to shoot people. They are not taught how to help people in a crisis, and we see it time and time again. And they, again, are not coming today in our modern system, in the way things are right now. They are not coming and stopping a burglary mid-burglary. They're not stopping a rape mid-rape. If you believe that, you're misinformed. That is a fallacy. So they're not coming and stopping that. So why not replace them with people who don't have a history of murdering people and brutalizing people?
Well, I think it definitely makes sense when we're talking about mental health situations. I don't understand why we're sending armed police officers to deal with that when a trained individual that knows how to deal with psychological issues would make more sense. Also, I wanted to thank Kate for the super chat. And she mentioned that this isn't going to be the only budget reconciliation bill. There'll be more. You're right. We should use them to our benefit as progressives. And also wanted to mention to folks, if you have questions on what Awkward is talking about, go ahead and drop them in the chat so we can get them to him. Good.
Yeah, I think honestly, when it's a fire, it should be a fireman. When there's a medical issue, it should be someone who has training in that, like an EMS person. When it's a mental health problem, it is someone who has a specialty in handling that. You know, and then when we, in the rare occasion that, you know, you are robbed, there would be people who are not armed, who are there to, like, it's not that someone who committed a robbery it's not that there would be no effort to identify who that person was and help you get restitution.
Right.
There would still be a court system. It would just be a completely different court system where it wasn't cops who are tied in directly with other law enforcement, known as district attorneys, where prosecutors don't have discretion and immunity alongside judges who have the same, where all of these people's entire missions are to incarcerate as many people as possible, and where, you know, it is all for profit. So 7 out of 10 people sitting in jail are only there because they can't afford to get out and have not been convicted of a crime.
That's true, right? We've criminalized poverty to the extent if somebody can't post bail, they're still in jail. They have not been put on trial. They haven't been convicted of a thing. They just can't afford to post bail, but they're still sitting there, locked up. How is that justice?
It's certainly not. And, you know, with all of the billions and trillions of dollars that we put into police departments, we can actually fund social services, education, and jobs training, and the things that we need that would actually reduce crime. So you'd be less likely to need someone who you believe is a police officer right now in the first place. If no one is in a desperate situation, you're going to have far fewer people doing crimes. You know, the people that are labeled criminal in this country are a very distinct population that is way smaller and than the population of people who have broken the law.
Right.
All of us have broken one law or another.
Oh, so, I know, I definitely have.
Right? And so why aren't you labeled a criminal? It has something to do with your
Are you kidding me?
I've
tried to get arrested by the LAPD at protests. They won't arrest me.
Right. It has something to do with the way you look. So, you know,
and that I have a press credential, so. Although that hasn't stopped them with other folks.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah. I mean, Portland's a great example. So is New York City. You know, independent media have less and less protections. And
all joking aside, that is true, and it's not good. Look, they'll go after anybody that they feel is a threat to their power structure.
Absolutely, and that's also part of you know, what we're working toward is ending all counter-protest violence, which includes targeting you know, protesters and members of the media who have every right to document it. You know, protesters are exercising their First Amendment rights. And when they're protesting police brutality, to respond with more police brutality, I think says a lot about our country and about policing in this country.
I have a very strong belief that tear gas should not be allowed. It's very deadly. I don't know if folks realize how deadly tear gas is. People have died from tear gas. Yeah, and, I
mean, I don't believe that there should be any crowd dispersal.
Rubber bullets, pepper spray, right? I want to ask you about, somebody in the chat mentioned traffic-related instances where a lot of the brutality we've seen from police officers has come from traffic stops, stops, which is absolutely true. Berkeley, the city of Berkeley, recently decided that armed police officers would no longer be responding to traffic-related incidences. So if you're getting pulled over for a speeding ticket, running a red light, these sorts of things, they're going to have a separate traffic division that is unarmed. This makes sense to me. What are your thoughts on that? Are there other cities that are looking at doing this that you know of?
I'm sure there are. I don't know about that particular policy, but it is absolutely a positive step because, you know, certain people who have been criminalized in certain neighborhoods are targeted and pulled over. They are more likely to be pulled over. They are more likely to be to have their car searched. They're more likely to be beaten and murdered at this traffic stop. And police not only disproportionately pull over people of color and poor people, but they also plant evidence and do all kinds of other corrupt and illegal things.
Oh, they definitely plant evidence. That's the other thing. A lot of people think that's not true, but look how many times this has already been substantiated, undoubtedly the case. And I guarantee that there are more instances of this happening that we don't even know about.
Absolutely. You know, that's why it's so important to film the police, because that's how we know this is happening, and because we can see it with our own eyes. And, you know, I think it's a great start to no longer have police doing this work, but it would be a better step to not have police at all. And it would be a better step to stop pulling people over with a punitive intention. If someone is driving erratically and they are a risk to themselves or those around them, they should be pulled over for a safety check. But right now, you know, police or whoever is doing this job of pulling people over, it's being done for profit. Ticketing.
Well, yeah, there's that
is
too.
one example. You know, and there are quotas in police departments for how many people you have to pull over. This is one of many ways that for-profit policing exists, and it's completely unnecessary. So that's another thing that, you know, we think can easily be abolished before we abolish all police.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So I'm just looking over here at the questions to see if there's more. I don't see anything coming up yet. So 10 Demands for Justice, which is your nonprofit organization, you're working in this area. What are some of the key things that you're focused on currently? And if there are folks that are watching the show that are activists that want to become involved in this area, what is some of the recommendations that you have for them?
You know, I would say that the best thing you can do is support local causes. You know, we at 10 Demands put together these concrete demands because it has been proven that demands are effective, that a protest without concrete demands will be less effective than one where it is very clear what people are protesting for and what changes they want to see made. So the 10 Demands provide a roadmap to abolition. What's that?
Somebody just says, show us your furry friends.
If any, I mean, there are so many, and if any of them came, I wouldn't hesitate, but they're all over this house.
Yeah, Hypatia's now left. She knows she's in trouble for unplugging the mic.
For real. So where was I? Oh,
sorry.
I mean, so the 10 Demands, you know, is designed to, you know, defund the police, demilitarize the police, get police out of schools, end carceral punishment, end solitary confinement, start building these community, you know, justice networks, you know, provide community oversight. There's a lot of things that will hold police accountable and reduce police budgets until we get to the point where police are no longer necessary. And the same goes for prisons. And all of these, and so some of the laws and changes that fall under the 10 Demands would need to be made at the federal level. Some can be made at the state level, and many can be made at the municipal, the city, the town level. So I would say to use the 10 Demands as a guide, you know, as a guideline or, you know, recommendations for what you can urge your city councils to implement, your mayors. And I would always say that, you know, you need to support movements that are already underway in your local area. So do your research to find out if there are mutual aid groups, if there are local chapters of Black Lives Matter, you know, that are autonomous, you know, things like that. If there are local defund organizations, there's a lot of DSA chapters that have subgroups focused on defunding and decarceral efforts. So support those, support Black women, support organizations led by people of color, and take examples like Seattle, like Austin, where they, put concrete demands on the desks of the mayors and city council while protests were going on, and have been effective. They have not reached full defunding, but there have been significant percentages taken out of many police budgets across the country, with reallocation to homeless services and other social services, which is exactly what we're calling for at 10 Demands. If you don't have the time to engage in a group, you are not interested in putting yourself potentially at risk by being on the streets protesting, if you don't have a lot of money and can't financially support, you can always go to 10forjustice.com and click on the Take Action page. And with a simple text, you can send a letter to your mayor, your governor, your state Congress, or your national Congress representative, holding them accountable, telling them that they can be a part of ending the injustice of over-policing, police violence, and mass incarceration, or they can take a back seat, not prioritize the issues that actually matter to us, and you won't vote for them again. It's as simple as texting like 5 numbers to 5 other numbers.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah, that's like a really easy thing that anybody can do.
So Henry brought up Adam 12. Who remembers Adam 12? Henry, I do, because I'm a little bit older, seasoned. Adam 12, I want to talk about, he just basically said if all cops were like Adam 12, it'd be a different world. And he's not wrong on this. So this prompts me to ask you this. Why is it that Hollywood, right, or the entertainment industry has sort of romanticized cops, whether it's through movies, whether it's through these TV shows? The tales they tell about the police are just completely not like reality, right? The cops are always like these amazing individuals doing the right thing, fighting for justice. They care about justice more than they do their quotas. But this isn't reality. Why has Hollywood sort of participated in this propaganda, making them to be different than what they are?
There are financial reasons. There are ties between the companies that, the major media companies that own the Hollywood studios, and the politicians that, donate to police foundations. It may come off like a conspiracy theory, but it's not a conspiracy if it's true. It's not a certain, religion. It's not my Jewish people who are secretly sitting at a table doing this.
No, it's
but
definitely not.
There are corporations and politicians who all benefit from this from the proliferation of this white supremacist system. The cops protect private property over people. Not to say that every single movie that perpetuates these stereotypes was, the brainchild of, someone who insisted that the screenwriter and the director write it this way. Not every movie is influenced by a specific individual, but when you look over the course of decade after decade, it's certainly, there is a common thread that runs through it.
There definitely is. Let me ask you this, though, Awkward. I feel like on a certain level, the liberals in Hollywood, and they're definitely neoliberals, let's be clear, they've sort of always embraced the police in the same way conservatives have, right? Because a lot of them are wealthy. They do want their private property to be protected, So, of course, I always think to myself, well, the liberals, they don't want reform to the system because they're wealthy neoliberals and they sort of want to protect themselves. And they see any sort of defund the police sort of initiative as being a threat to that. But I do see what you're saying about the donations. And I think a lot of the benevolent societies I know that I've looked into corporations have been donating to those benevolent societies that are connected to
yeah.
the police departments. And I wonder, as you're saying this, I'm wondering, is there quid pro quo going on?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And, they, and that is why reforms are touted by people on both sides of the aisle. The decision by Biden is the most recent, where he decided he's going to no longer allow private federal prisons.
Right. That's just a small percentage of them, though. I mean,
correct. That's that's the thing, is it is a way to appear as if you're trying to improve things. And so neoliberals and conservatives who don't really want their cushy lives to be impacted, who still believe in the fallacies about, like, the scary criminal who's, taking over our cities, who knows they benefit from the system as it is, but wants to feel like they're decent, will support things that are just gentler forms of genocide, or just different ways that look a little less scary. So if we realize that prisons are not these beautiful places of penitence and rehabilitation that we thought, let's instead put people in their homes and lock them up there. But entire books, like Prison by Any Other Name, have been written about the fact that house arrest and electronic monitoring are just another form of incarceration. And that it actually, by growing these methods of control and state surveillance, we're just expanding the carceral state, and people just can't get out. So when they get out of prison, they're in another form of control. Parole and probation are both, insanely demanding and designed to completely control you, to make your life as difficult as possible, and most likely to send you right back where you came from, or there for the first time. So, reform, that's why we say reforms don't work, because in one way or another, they all, like Biden's decision to, end private prisons at the federal level. Anyone who's in a federal private prison, when this takes effect, is just going to go to a different prison. It's a reform that once again assumes that prison is the answer. So the changes that we make need to question whether prisons are the answer, and chip away at the institutions that proliferate imprisonment and caging of people and criminalizing of people. We need to replace these things with things that actually humanize people and treat humans as potentially productive members of society, not from a capitalist perspective, but from a humanist perspective.
I don't think that should be controversial, although some people might think it is. Look, the reality is, in other countries, they don't have this ridiculous prison system that we do. Look, if you're arrested and say you're innocent, even maybe you're not, but you're in prison, you're going to come out a harder individual. There's no two ways about it. If you did not go into that prison system as a murderer and an angry individual that, full of anger and hate, like, you're going to come out that way. There's nothing good about what we're doing. I do think that the private prisons were making it a bit worse. So I'm glad that we're seeing those go away. At least we're not, monetizing it to the extent that we were, or allowing these corporations to. There's still inherent problems, though, and you're right.
Yeah, and just two final comments on that.
Sure.
I mean, one is that people don't understand that state and federal prisons that are not run by corporations also are for profit. That everything from the food they eat to the clothes they wear, to the bedding, to the furniture is created by corporations. And then the people in those prisons work for slave wages building things, creating things,
Yes.
designing things for corporations. So there's always the profit motive, and just ending prisons that are actually built and maintained and monitored by private entities doesn't actually end the prison industrial complex.
No, it definitely doesn't. And in fact, that is one of the worst things that Kamala Harris did that a lot of Californians aren't okay with her about, was she defended the labor system. She went to fight the decision that they had to release some of these folks. She actually made the argument that California could not afford to release these prisoners because they were a valuable labor source.
Right.
And a lot of people know that we have a fire department that is added to by prison labor. So prison labor is definitely deeply ingrained into the system, and it's kind of an immoral thing, if you ask me, for Kamala Harris to say that.
Totally.
I mean, I'm still like, does she not hear how immoral that sounds? But
and it's also incredibly expensive to incarcerate someone. It costs It costs a lot more to incarcerate someone than to send them to college. So it's really just a matter of what our priorities are. We don't want them to go to college. And then one other thing I'll say is that, while you're right that the prisons themselves are not built to rehabilitate people, and, there are no programs really left to help even past the time when you're there. They, for instance, made access to Pell Grants in 1994 no longer no longer accessible to people who are incarcerated. So almost every single educational program was gotten rid of.
Right.
And so there is no way to improve yourself, get an
That's
education,
crazy.
be in a better position. And yet, despite all of this, almost every single formerly incarcerated person that I speak with says that they were radicalized in prison, that they were educated in prison, that, because of their incredible resourcefulness and incredible ingeniousness and refusal to give up and refusal to accept the fact that they were the animals that they were treated like.
Yeah.
They found ways to get the education that they were never given before they went to prison. Mm-hmm. They typically come from communities that, the schools, the education is pathetic. They have to go through metal detectors. They have to walk past cops who body slam their peers the day before. Yeah. They come from families where they're working multiple jobs, or one of the parents is already incarcerated, so they're hungry. It's and so they're not getting the education that I got, and they come out of prison and they connect with a reentry organization and find a job, and these are the people who, of course, haven't recidivized or recidivated and haven't ended up back in prison. Right. But I hear time and time again that despite all of the prison's best efforts, there are people who are still rehabilitating and educating themselves because that's what they want to do for themselves. And it's incredibly powerful to witness the growth of some of these people who had everything, positioned against them and managed to achieve despite being incarcerated for, 12 years or something.
Excellent. All right, so let's wrap this up, Awkward. I know you got to get going here. If folks want to follow you on Twitter, what is your Twitter handle? And then also the website for 10 Demands. Is it 10demandsforjustice.com?
Yep. It's 10 for Justice.
10 for Justice. Okay.
Yep. It's TENFOR justice.com. And I am one of a number of co-founders, the only white-skinned straight male in the group, just the most talkative one. And my Twitter is Awkward Rap, AWKWORD Rap, because I am a rapper in addition to an activist, with my most recent song being of the same name, 10 Demands, where we focus on our criminal injustice system and the ways to overcome it through music.
Indeed. I mean, Chuck D, I know that's how I found you. Chuck D gave you a shout out. You know, Chuck D is also a very political individual in addition to being obviously a very famous rap star. And, you know, and I think back also to when he opened for Bernie Sanders here in Los Angeles at that rally about a year ago. Yep. And to me, that was wild because I never thought I'd see a presidential candidate, you know, allowing for, you know, can I say fuck? Beat the police. You know,
it says a lot about Bernie. Yeah, I mean, it says a lot about Bernie.
It says a lot about Bernie, I think, yeah. All good things. Anyway, so thanks for joining us today, and thank everybody in the audience in Status Coup. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week. And also make sure that you tune into, if you didn't watch it this morning, John Farina was live streaming at this crazy MAGA 2024 rally in Times Square in New York. Some crazy stuff. It's worth watching just for the crazy. All right, everybody.